Hi guys, my name is Kirsty and welcome back to Upside Down Books. Today we're going to be looking at my recent reads and everything that I read in September.
Non più tra I farfalloni amoroso, notte giorno di
I had a really good reading month in September, which was really nice. It's always great when you get a lot of reading done, and I cannot wait to share all the books I read with you. It was my second highest reading month, both in terms of number of books I read and in terms of the number of pages I read, which was so exciting, and I'm actually going to remember to share these statistics with you this time because I haven't done that for ages. I feel like the camera angle is a bit... we're going to lift you up a bit. Hang on. So in September I managed to read 9 books, and that was the equivalent of about 3,500 pages, so I am pretty happy with how much reading I got done. I read some books that were challenging and I read some books with really high page counts, so on the whole, big tick considering how busy I am about how much I actually got read last month. I think that was fantastic. Now I have the Storygraph app on my phone, so I can also tell you some other fun statistics. I pretty much only log my books on Storygraph purely so I can get these. I think they're quite fun. So I can tell you that 67% of my books were slow paced, so somebody give me an award for getting through 9 books when there were so many that were slow paced. Only 11% of my books were fast and 22% came in at a medium pace. Now the statistic that I find quite interesting is that 50% of my books were 300 pages or less. I didn't feel like I read that many short books, whereas only 17% were over 500, 33% were between 300 to 500 pages. So bit of a good spread there. So according to Storygraph and the way that they categorize books into genres, this was the breakdown for this month. I don't necessarily always agree with this, but I will explain which books are which as we go through them. So my highest genre count was fantasy, coming in at just 3 books actually, and then the next 3 genres tied. So thriller, historical fiction, and contemporary I all read 2 books for, apparently. I had 3 books that I rated 5 stars, 3 books I rated 4, 2 I rated 3, and 1 that I rated 1. I think my most fun statistic on here is... will you focus on the screen? I think my favorite statistic on here is it shows you the pages you've read with like a day breakdown. I'm not quite sure how it does that. I think that must depend on when you update your like progress, but that's pretty cool. But those are all the statistics, so now let's get into the wrap up. In terms of how I'm tracking for my reading goal, as of when I'm filming, I'm actually only 1 book off my Goodreads challenge of 65 books for the year, which is really exciting. That is including an additional book you'll see in October, but I am really hoping that I am going to beat my best reading year ever. I had quietly set myself the goal, if you remember, if you were here at the start of the year, that I actually wanted to read 75 books this year, but I set myself the realistic goal of 65. However, I am now on track to read 81 books this year, and in 2016 I read 85, so I'm really hoping I can read 86 this year and beat that. In terms of how I'm tracking for my other challenges, the Colleen Hoover challenge has basically fallen off the bandwagon and I've just given up on that one. I wanted to try and read as many of her books this year as I could, but I just didn't really plan it very well, and it hasn't really happened. I think I've read 1 book by her this year, so I think that was the only real challenge that we can discuss right now. I think next month I'll be able to tell you how I've done with my Goodreads Choice Awards predictions. You can watch that video if you don't know what I'm talking about, where I try to predict which books would get selected and then try to read a few from the genres so that I would have something to vote on. I think I've been doing okay on that one, but I haven't checked my progress for that, so I'm just going to save it for when the awards are announced, and we'll have a whole video about that. On to what I actually read. So the first book that I read was my 1-star read, and it was, wasn't impressed with this book. It was Saving Seymour by L.N. Locke. I'd been really excited about this book because I loved the cover. I was sent a digital copy of this to review by the author, but I found this to just be a massive rip-off of the movie Free Willy, which essentially has, like, the entire plotline is within this book, so I was disappointed to find that out. So I'm not going to talk much more about this one. If you're interested, you can read my review on Goodreads. But yeah, this one just didn't really do it for me, but it was the last arc that I had been meaning to finish for arc August, so at least it's done. We can tick that one off the list. The next book I read, however, was a 5-star read and I loved it, and I'm actually hoping to go and pick up a physical copy of this because I need this on my bookshelf, and that is The Rose Code by Kate Quinn. Oh, this book is This book is rivaling The Good Wife of Bath for how much I enjoyed it. It is a massive book. It is about 600 pages, which is outlandishly long for historical fiction, but I love this. It's set during World War II. It follows 3 women, and it kind of flips back and forth between the present and the past, but it's all in the past. And it's mostly about the time during the war, but we know that post-war, which is the contemporary timeline, that one of the girls is now in an asylum, and she sends a coded message to her friends to ask them to help break her out because she knows something. And it's this big sort of mystery. It's all wrapped up in a what is actually going on sort of vibe. But I just loved it. The main story takes place in Bletchley Park, which is the place where they were using Enigma machines to break German code and figure out what the Germans are planning and try and help win the war that way. And it's a very, very important part of history, and it's all been wrapped up in like the Secrecy Act for many, many decades. So we're suddenly getting a lot of fiction about it recently, as people are able, I would say in the last 10-20 years, have been able to talk about it and probably actually have the time and knowledge to make films about it. Something like The Imitation Game with Benedict Cumberbatch is a really popular film that is also touching on this topic. So if that is something that interests you, then I recommend picking it up, because whilst it is really long, it is so thrilling and it is so much fun. And Osla is the main character and I just love her. So I have my review up on my blog and on Goodreads, which you can check out. Links will be below to those if you want to hear more of my thoughts on this. But yeah, 5-star read, absolutely loved it. I was genuinely really blown away by the quality of writing here. The next book I read was a 4-star read and a little bit left of centre. It was also a review copy, and that is The Last of the Apple Blossom by Marie-Lou Stevens. This was the book club pick of the month for September? Must have been August, for the Harlequin Book Club, which is the book stack. Again, links will be below, and I actually really liked this one. I was not expecting to. When I got this in the mail and I saw the cover, there are a variety of books being picked for this book club, and I have to say that when I get books like this, I'm always a little bit skeptical, but my reading preferences are being challenged in a way that I'm really enjoying. This is not something I would usually pick up off the bookshelf, but I thought it was very compelling. And it's really one of those books I just keep coming back to in my mind. It's set in Tasmania in the 60s, which is in Australia, and it's set after in the aftermath of this great fire that has gone ripped through the Huon Valley. First of all, don't know if that's how that's pronounced. Huon? I've never been to Tasmania, but I loved this, and it has the main character Catherine, and she's basically trying to put herself and her family back together because her brother dies in the fire, which is like page 1, no spoilers. And it's how she copes with that, and then there's like a stranger that comes into town and stays for a while, and it's all a bit mysterious, and her best friend's being a little bit weird, and you kind of think it's this family saga sort of story about this independent woman making her own way and challenging her father, who doesn't want her to take over the family orchard, which is an apple orchard. And I thought, first of all, that was a really cool setting, and second of all, I loved the way that they were challenging the status quo of women being able to take over family businesses, because it was meant to have gone to her brother. But then come the end, this is a real slap in the face with a big plot twist and some really, really unexpected things that will shock you, and I really, really enjoyed that aspect of this book. I thought it was really good. This was a very happy 4 stars for me, and I'm looking forward to reading September and October's book of the month, because they will be good if the track record of those book selections for this is anything to go by. The next book I read was absolutely huge, and it actually triggered me to go through this whole method of working out page counts and how fast I can read books. And that book was Empire of the Vampire by J. Kristoff. So I've had this on pre-order for a really long time, and this is the special edition for Australia, which is signed, which I think I have discussed in my book haul recently, and I loved this. This was a 5-star read. It was my first J. Kristoff book, and I'm pleased to say that I thought he was absolutely fabulous. So I really wanted to read this as soon as it came out, because it's a huge book. It is actually longer than Game of Thrones. This is what I've worked out. So from my calculations, worst case scenario, the word count for this book is creeping up to about 400,000 words. Game of Thrones word count is just shy of 300,000. Now I think the word count will be smaller because I can't account for chapter titles and things like that, but nonetheless, it's not going to be a 100,000 word difference. So this is a massive book, and it took me a little while to read, considering how fast and how much I was reading it, but it was so compelling I couldn't put it down. And I was really worried that reading a J. Kristoff book would be difficult because there's so much hype around him, but that was the reason why I wanted to get into it as soon as I received it, so I could read it before everyone hyped it up too much for me. And I'm really impressed. I'm really impressed with this style of writing. It was very reminiscent of the storytelling style that Patrick Rothfuss uses in The Name of the Wind. So very, very different stories. And it obviously is centric around vampires. So in this world we have Gabriel, who is half vampire, half human essentially. And he gets like raised and trained in this sort of castle monastery vibe of a place, and they as like penance for their sin of being born half vampire, they are the ones that go out and protect the humans and kill the vampires. So there's this really epic political tension between all the different factions, and Gabriel himself is a very tormented and dark, conflicted, sort of broody character, but he's so funny and the humor is hilarious. As you can see, I have extensively tabbed this just because there were so many good one-liners. My full review for this is up on my blog and on Goodreads. Again, links will be below if you want to read that, and if you want to read what some of these quotes were because they were really, really good, then make sure you head through and have a read of that. But yeah, this was incredible. This was genuinely an impressive piece of fiction, and I'm really looking forward to continuing the series. The rest of the wrap-up, you are going to notice a bit of a trend that I happen to have done a better job of reading review copies in September than I did in August, which is hilarious considering that that was my challenge in August to read review copies, but that's just how the cookie crumbles. So the next book was sent to me by Bloomsbury, and it's one I've been itching to get around to reading ever since it landed on my doorstep, and that is What You Can See From Here by Mariana Leckie. This was originally published in German, so this year we got it in English, and I have been fascinated by this book simply because I love Okapi, which is the animal on the front cover. Now, this was a really interesting book. I ended up rating it 4 stars. I was not expecting it to be what it was, but I found it quite interesting reading, and I thought the writing style was very edgy and quite cool. So a lot of the characters are not named. The main character is, and a couple of the others, but there are characters that are simply called the optician or the shopkeeper, and there's this sort of arm's length attitude that creates a bit of a mystery, because the whole plot of this is that the grandmother in this story dreams of an okapi. She basically has a vision, she sees this animal, and that means that somebody in the village is going to die in the next 24 hours. So this book is divided into 3 parts, and in part 1 you have the build up to the death happening, and you spend a lot of the book you spend a lot of that part trying to figure out who it's going to be, and it really is quite unexpected, and I thought was a brilliant slap in the face. This is the first couple of lines in this, and I think it is magnificent. It says, "When Selma told us she dreamed of an okapi the night before, we all knew that one of us was going to die in the next 24 hours. We were almost right. It took 29. I just love that opening, had me hooked from that point. So yeah, happy 4 stars for this one. Thank you very much to Bloomsbury for sending me a copy. If you see this in the bookstore, then I recommend you pick it up. Very easy reading, an absolute breeze to get through. I think I read this in about 2 days. It's just so easy to consume and just enjoy. It's a good book. I recommend this one very much so. The next book I read was really cute, and this one was sent to me by Picador, and it's a really short one. The Cat Who Saved Books by Suzuki Natsukawa. Now this one is so tiny, and I think you've seen this one in my book haul, but I got sent this one and I was so excited to read it. It's been another translation book, so it has been translated from Japanese, and it is very cute. It's sort of a bit of a magical realism vibe. So you've got this boy who helps run the secondhand bookshop with his grandfather. It's their bookshop, and the grandfather dies at the very beginning, and it starts with the funeral essentially, and how sad and depressed the boy is. But then this cat comes along and says he needs his help. So the boy is taken on these quests. There are 3 different quests that the cat takes him on to save books from various things, and I thought it had a really good way of commentating on the way we treat reading and the way that the commercialization of many things in our world has skewed the way that we value things. It had some really heartwarming little anecdotes in it almost, and I just thought that this was a brilliant book. So if you're looking for a good Christmas gift to give someone, I really think this would fit the bill nicely. It's a good book to gift because it's not intimidating, it's cute, it's small, and it's actually got gold foiling on the front line because there's a lot of effort that's gone into the production of this book. So yeah, I was really happy with this. This was once again a 4-star read. So the next book I read, I was honestly surprised that I've managed to read it within a month, and that was The Fellowship of the Ring, so the first book in the Lord of the Rings, but I did not read this. I actually listened to this via audiobook just after my dad had read this and said that he didn't really enjoy it, so I was a little bit nervous. Now the audiobook for this is about 20 hours long, so it was quite long, but I actually managed to polish it off, and another audiobook in September. I did an amazing job with audiobooks in September. Now I ended up reading this 3 stars. I was a bit impartial about the whole thing, truth be told. I recently just rewatched the films, and I'm so glad I did because that really helped me to just better understand what was going on. We all know that this is a slow, lumberous sort of story, and things are really, really dialed back in terms of how much action is going on. There are some action scenes, but essentially this is a book about a group of people walking and sharing backstories. It is slowed down by the fact that when characters diverge and then meet up again, there's a lot of time dedicated to sitting down, storytelling, and the character that was away doing his thing, like Gandalf, spends so many pages retelling and filling in the characters and the reader as to what he's been doing. So like, it's a very different writing style, but I actually enjoyed this more because I paid particular attention to the author's foreword. So J.R.R. Tolkien has a foreword in this book. It was in my audiobook. I don't know if it's in every edition, but I believe it is. There's a note on the text and then there's the author's foreword, sort of explaining where he was, how he wrote this, and his intention for the book, and very, very great wry humour and a bit of a poke at the people who don't like Lord of the Rings. So I would honestly have a read of the author's foreword because I actually quite enjoyed that. But the way that Tolkien describes it as this is like meant as more of a history than necessarily an action story made me go in with the right mindset for reading this, and I think I enjoyed it as much as I could. I just don't think this is sort of worth any more than 3 stars. I'm anticipating books 2 and 3 will be much more exciting with the events that I know are going to happen in those later books, and I'm expecting that those will clock in at 4 or 5 stars. I'm going with a very passive 3 stars for this one, but yeah, really good audiobook. The audiobook narrator sang every single song in the book, which was so funny, so I can't recommend enough that you get the audiobook narrated by Robert Inglis if you like listening to audiobooks. The next book that I read was the only book that I read off my TBR in September, and that was Project Hail Mary. This was pulled from my Presents TBR jar. I confess I was a little bit disappointed that I got really distracted with all of these books during September that I didn't actually get to read the ones I pulled from my TBR jars because I was so excited about them. In particular, I was devastated I didn't get to Ninth House, but I've just had distractions and other books I've needed to get through, so that's just life, I guess. But I did get to read Project Hail Mary, and this was brilliant. This was a 5-star read and I loved it. This was the other book, as well as the next book I'm going to talk about, that was counted as a thriller on Storygraph, my statistics I gave you at the beginning. And yeah, I guess it is a bit thrilling. So this is a full-on sci-fi. If you don't know who Andy Weir is, he wrote The Martian, which was made into a film. Well, most people are familiar with that. And this does not disappoint. So in this one we start off with a character who wakes up from what he believes is a coma, and he can't really remember anything, and there's this sort of robot medic that's taking care of him, and he knows that he's on a spaceship. And so the story at the beginning is him trying to piece together things of what's going on, and he is on a mission to save Earth. Now, I'm not going to tell you too much about this. I think the blurb is perfectly done. There's a lot of things that are keeping you in the dark about what to expect in here, but there is mention of an unexpected ally who comes and helps him along the way, and that character that fulfills that role was so unexpected, and I have not read anything like this. This was honestly groundbreaking for me in terms of science fiction. I have read quite a bit of hard sci-fi before, which has a lot of the technical specifications. Someone like Peter F. Hamilton writes a lot of sci-fi like that, or even Christopher Paolini's latest book, and I quite enjoy that. I enjoy sinking into the real sciencey side of science fiction, usually taking place in outer space on a spaceship and lots of aliens are present. This was just done very differently, and the way that Weir approaches the topic of extraterrestrials or the potential of other life out there was a fresh perspective from what I have read. So this is obviously a 5-star read to me, and I cannot recommend enough that you pick this book up. This book was just so good, and I want to talk more about spoilers, but I won't. I might be doing a full review for this one. We'll see. We'll put a pin in that thought. I'm just, this book was very good. So that brings me to the final book that I managed to get through in September, and honestly I was really surprised that I finished this one, but it was just really hard to put down, and that was The Maidens by the guy's name Michaelides. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that. So the main plot of this book is that there is a murder that happens at Cambridge University, and the main character Mariana goes to visit her niece who lives at the college where the murder happens, and she's immediately suspicious of this guy called Edward Fosker, and the whole book is her trying to prove that it's him despite him having alibis and blah blah blah. So it's very, very psychologically twisty in that sense. Now this was really interesting reading because I feel like I'm sitting between 2 very divided camps of readers. There are some people that are not liking this book, and there are some people who are loving it, and I both love and hate this book. Hate is probably too strong of a word. I ended up rating it 3 stars. I can appreciate and see the issues with this book, but I still really enjoy the reading experience. I think in some, if you're looking for a thriller and you're a fan of The Silent Patient, which is his other book, then this is definitely a book for you. It's really good, it's very shocking, it's quite violent, it's quite dramatic in what's going on. But if you're going to more analytically analyze this and get caught up in semantics, then this might bother you. My main problems with this book is I didn't understand the very final thing that happened. It was after the conclusion of the huge, shocking plot twist that was so disturbing. So I understood the plot twist in the main part of the book, but this sort of ends on a bit of a cliffhanger, and yeah, I just didn't. It was one of those books that I was like, I don't understand what that means. And that really bothers me when I get to the end of the book and there's some other wise crack of a scene, and I just don't quite understand it. So, but I mean, that's obviously a me problem. I will just have to reread it until I get it. But the other problem that I had was that the character development was super flat. All the women are like not developed in this. The main character's not overly likable, and she keeps doing really dumb things that we're like, well, of course you're going to get killed if you do that. Of course there's going to be a bad guy around that corner. That sort of vibe. She's just full steam ahead on the railway to stupidity. And yeah, and every other female character was just a bit lacking in any sort of depth. And then conversely, all of the male characters were extremely predatory and problematic, and I thought that it was a bit over the top. Like, even the characters that are supposed to be nice, like Fred in this book, he's obsessing over Mariana and he's stalking her, and no one else is really questioning the actions of the men. And yeah, Fosca's character I thought was very weird and was so obviously creepy that I was concerned why no one in the book at all was more believing of Mariana's accusations against him, which I think the reason why people weren't was to build up the idea that as a woman she wasn't being listened to. But there were just a few things like that I was just a bit like, 3 stars from me on this one. Loved it, didn't love it, unsure, very confused, but otherwise I still recommend it. So those are all the books that I read in September. I got a lot of reading done. In particular, I was very excited about Empire of the Vampire. I am pleased with what I read, but I am disappointed that I didn't get to even more. But I mean, I read 9 books in 1 month, and that's honestly quite a lot for me. So I am happy with my progress in that sense. So let me know in the comments down below if you've read any of these books or if you're planning to, and I will see you in my next video. Goodbye.